Hey guys, welcome back to Baker Health Talks. I'm your co host Mo. Have you ever wanted to start a business but you didn't know how? In today's episode, we had the honor of interviewing the lonely entrepreneur, Michael Dermer. He's going to give you all the ins and outs on how to start your business and how to become a successful entrepreneur.
Very excited tonight. I have a very unique guest who has an incredible background. It's really unique. It's very interesting. We were chatting a little bit. It's Mr. Michael Dermer. I'm gonna let him tell his journey because it's not one of those that I could just like read a CV off of. It's a unique journey, fascinating, and actually has really been in the thick of healthcare. An attorney by background, really an entrepreneur at his soul, but has actually been in the thick of healthcare. Um, Came out of healthcare and then now helps entrepreneurs with his new enterprise. And the reason we thought talking to Michael would be interesting is because a lot of the folks trying to do stuff to disrupt or improve healthcare, which is very needed, have to do it kind of anti-establishment, right? If you think about healthcare, healthcare sucks and it's broken, but there's no shortage of incumbents. There's very large insurance companies, very large academic centers. So if you think it's broken, then by definition, the incumbents are not doing the job. And then therefore you need kind of the rebels, if you will, that are willing to disrupt. And in the business world, the rebel is the entrepreneur. Um, and so there is no shortage. In fact, I would say the majority of doctors that I'm friends with, whether they work in academic settings, they work for large employed groups, the majority of the doctors I know are as frustrated or more frustrated with healthcare than the patients. See, the dirty secret in healthcare is every patient hates healthcare, right?
Yeah.
They're like, this sucks, blah, blah, blah. What they don't know is the doctors are more frustrated than they are.
Yeah.
The problem is, well, why don't the doctors do something about it? Is because the system is so regulated and so opaque that, just like you don't know what bill you're going to get or what your deductible or copay is, the doctors have no idea what happens when they press send in their EMR and flows, and let alone them waking up and thinking, how do I fix this whole system, right? They feel just as lost and powerless as the patients that they're trying to serve. And so one thing I've experienced on my journey and with my brother is you really see my benefit is I have a brother who's a doctor who is an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
And it means a lot because your organization is called the Lonely Entrepreneur, and I want you to get into it. But to have a built-in partner who's my best friend my whole life,
Yeah.
who goes through it, that's like a huge hack.
Yeah.
Right. Because then you're like a little nervous and he stands you up, or he's a little nervous, I stand him up.
Mm.
And so I think that's something that I'm fortunate to have. But most folks don't have.
Yeah.
And what you've built and what the kind of gospel you're spreading, I think is incredible. I think it's just awesome. And before we get into that, maybe Michael, if you don't mind, just going through your personal journey, which is fascinating, and telling us how you got to where you are.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I started my career as a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. I started working for a large, very prestigious New York law firm. Really was an entrepreneur at heart, but my dad's like, go play corporate lawyer, learn how money moves and deals get done. And I was only interested in bigger things. And when you go work for this great law firm like Wilkie Farr, you don't just leave, right? Because if you stay long enough, you're kind of set for life, and so you don't just kind of walk out the door when you say I'm going to create the next coffee shop. And I was literally out to dinner with a couple of friends of mine, and one of my friends' wives was pregnant, and she comes into dinner and she's like, "Do you realize for every 10 women that don't follow their prenatal care, it costs the healthcare system $1 million?" So you have a bunch of bankers and lawyers around the table, none of which know anything about healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my kind of snarky banker friends says, if it really costs $1 million for 10 women, why wouldn't you pay them all 10 grand to just follow their prenatal care?
Mm-hmm.
And one of my friends is like, this is the worst dinner conversation ever. And we forgot about it. And the next day I went into my law firm, was bugging me. And I worked for this prestigious law firm, a young guy in my 20s. And I knock on the door of a healthcare partner there, deal guy. And I said, can I ask you a question? He goes, sure. I go, what do you think about this? He goes, in healthcare, we know exactly what we want to get everybody to do. Women, men, diabetics, heart disease. We just can't get them to do it. And if you could get them to do it with incentives and you could make the math work, it would save billions. And that was it. Just for about 6 months at the end of my 12-hour M&A lawyer day, I would business plan it and then left about 6 months later and started what got to be known as the first company in the U.S. to reward people for being healthy.
So there's a lot there. I just want to one thing I tell folks is in doing that. When Mo came up with the idea to do this, I have no idea about social media. He's like, Z, we should do this. I was like, okay, let's get like subject matter experts, right? So I get like the chairman of the children's hospital or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was good. Like that was good. But and then we started to, I don't want to say we got bored. I would say we got more curious. And then when we got really cool guests like you, one thing I learned is I was like, oh, this story's cool or this product's cool. Let's get the guy or the gal behind it. And of course, what I learned, which now is super obvious, is the more unique the perspective or the, company, the whatever, it all stems from a unique background of the individual behind it, right? Like nobody took the most traditional path and made an untraditional organization or disruption. And so I've learned to like sit a little bit on the personal journey because I find it personally fascinating, but I think it actually informs the output. And so I have a couple of questions there because, it's interesting. We're going to get to this company, The Lonely Entrepreneur, which basically the spirit of it is entrepreneurship is the Wild West. It's a word everybody throws around, but nobody knows the meaning of it, let alone where to start exactly. And there's no real playbook. And so you're like, well, there should be a playbook. And we're going to get to that. But the interesting thing about your journey is you're an attorney. You decide to like leave this amazing job and take a very high risk entrepreneurial endeavor. And you didn't have the playbook. You said, okay, I'm just going to go, as you put it, like business plan at the end of the night. And you just went by that. That's like hugely complicated and courageous and, not insignificant. Can you talk a little bit about, you went by that with a lot of humility, but can you just talk about, there must have been something in you that's like, well, this is not guaranteed to work. I'm leaving like a high 6-figure job in a great, like as you said, I'm set. Like this is not guaranteed to work. What kind of, like, there's a lot of people doing something that they don't want to do, that know what they want to do. And the reason they don't take that jump is two things. I think the second part of our conversation, which is they don't know how to do the entrepreneur thing. But the step before that is the risk, the courage, the unknown. Can you talk about that aspect first? Like how you were willing to just do it?
Yeah.
Are you just a big, I love risk guy or what is it?
They call it insanity at some point. No. I think there were a couple of things. First, the value was really obvious. Like I don't consider myself a serial entrepreneur, but you looked at every other consumer industry out there and every single one of them used rewards and incentives. And I remember sitting there a couple months before I left and I'm like, what am I missing? Like, why hasn't somebody done this? There's Visa and MasterCard and all these reward programs. And then somebody gave me the example of, on average, moms, parents take their kids to the emergency room who have asthma 3 times a year and it costs $80,000 and they could have gotten a $100 inhaler. So for me, it was just the value story, but it was also something that came from my early life in sports. I played 2 sports in college and was very lucky that I played sports. And my dad taught me something really interesting. My dad's like, when everybody else is looking left, look right. And I think he said that because I'm a 5'10" Jewish kid, right? So he's like, you're not going to be 6'3" and dunking on people. Like you're going to have to be smarter about it. And he taught me in all I happen to play thinking positions, quarterback, center half, shortstop, right? Like, and you're seeing the field. And he always kind of taught me strategically, right? When you're looking at everybody in the football field's looking there, the most dangerous guys over there. And I just always had that perspective. So it wasn't unnatural for me to say, this is the way everybody's thinking about it. And why haven't they done this in healthcare? Now there has to be this kind of balance between ego and humility that goes into this, right? You have to have ego to say to the healthcare community, you're going to do something you've never done before. And hopefully, and I don't think I had enough of this at the time, the humility to know what you're going to go through. And so I just think that, when you're an athlete and you're wired as an M&A lawyer, you're just like, give me the problem. I got to go over there and let me go do it. So there's a little naivete that comes with it. But for me, it was all about the value that the idea created. And then the rest of it's just the how.
I'm a big sports guy. What did you learn? Give me one thing that you learned in sports. Because what you just said about everybody's looking left, look right. I feel I'll take that as advice your dad gave you. So that's what you learned from your dad. What did you learn being a competitive athlete that made you a better entrepreneur?
I came into being an entrepreneur with a couple of deficiencies, and that was I was a college athlete and an M&A lawyer, which is in a New York law firm. which is just like go.
Yeah.
And you have the expectation that everybody is doing exactly the same pace. Like I remember it's like, why aren't my $30,000 a year, $30,000 a year people working till midnight every day?
Right.
And you think everybody else is nuts. In fact, we have a book called Lonely Entrepreneur. We have a chapter in that's called Everybody Sucks.
Yeah.
Because you think everybody sucks. And what you really realize is it's you. And what it took me back to in sports is when you're sitting in a huddle of a football team and you're the quarterback, you're actually practicing emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
The real skill is, how do I get this group of people to perform? Not what I said in my early entrepreneur days, which is, you guys are all crazy. Why aren't you working harder? It's the evolution that I really learned was that, in that huddle, one guy you pat on the back, one guy you tell him his dad's not going to be proud of him anymore.
Right.
Like they're all motivated by different things.
Right.
And I really learned that. I didn't employ it right away because I was an idiot ex-M&A lawyer, just
me.
hard charging.
Yeah.
Right? Where are you guys all just going?
Yeah,
with
I
me?
can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And also expecting the same level from others.
Right.
I'm probably the only guy that worked less starting a company because I was a New York M&A lawyer, right? But you had that ridiculous mentality.
Yeah.
And so you learn to grow as an entrepreneur into a CEO,
Right.
which takes a lot of time. But I think that whole idea of emotional intelligence, I can do it.
Yeah.
I don't have to be motivated. How do I get everybody else to be excited, motivated, in it for themselves to get that along? And that, I learned a lot from that.
That's incredibly insightful. And I think what I'm gleaning from you, like a incredible characteristic you have, you've built several companies, you've had several careers, all of which you've been very successful at. Personal insight is something I've learned as I talk to certain level of people, is one of the traits that if you asked me 5-6 years ago, even when I knew very successful people, but what I've seen now is personal insight. And a version of that along the lines of what you said is, okay, balancing humility and ego. It's something people don't even think about. They just kind of go, but recognizing that you better have ego if you're going to challenge the status quo.
You have to.
But if you challenge it blindly and stupidly, then you're going to step in it. And so you need to have the humility, and just knowing that those two levers are there, let alone that you have to titrate them, is its own thing. Right?
I didn't, but if you were to say how much of the humility lever did I have when I left my firm? Zero.
Okay. But can I ask you something? If you accomplished what you set out to do and you had zero of that, was that not the right ingredient? What do you look back at and say, like, why do you look back? And I'm sure there's an obvious answer. Maybe there isn't. Why do you look back and say, I wish I had more humility, if you had the balls to leave because you didn't have the humility and you hit the home run you wanted to? Why do you look back and say, I should have had more humility?
Well, you could have done it so much better, right?
Okay.
Like when you come out and you're 100% ego, and you're just like, go, 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 go. And you're like, all you people have to keep up, right? It's not my job to motivate you, get to go along. Like you should be just the way I am.
Okay.
That's wrong. And you end up just putting your hand on the stove.
Okay.
And you realize that you as a leader, you're not just running around with an idea, right? You're just like leading a team. You're growing a company, which is an organism. You guys know it's an organism with moving parts.
Yeah.
And so now you're being gracious. Now I have a great balance of ego and humility. Then if you drew a pie chart, if we could sliver out 1% of humility, it might have been there. But now you just learn and you grow. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that happens too, is you go from being a founder to a CEO.
Right.
And one of the things we'll talk about later in Lonely Entrepreneur is that people never tell you the difference. Right. They're just like, and CEO skills are different.
Very much.
Over time. And I think that if someone would describe me the way you described it, my team would laugh at it right now.
Oh yeah.
About the way I was in my late 20s and early 30s running that company. But you hopefully learn. Yeah,
that's really fascinating. And I guess you talked about being in the huddle. And it's a funny thing. Where I used to work, they took us to when you're like an executive at some corporation, they do all these like weekend retreats, and they'll bring in like Stanford business professors to like lectures. They shuttle around like the executives. And usually I'm asleep during these seminars, but one thing caught my eye once. They had a professor who made a comment. They said, if you look at any major organization, like Fortune 5, Fortune 10, whatever, and you look at the managing directors of a division in there. So if it's like whatever, the Four Seasons Hotel or whatever, it's the head of food and beverage across the globe, the head of hospitality across the globe. when they interview their reports, the people under them that report to them, when they interview them and they say for the top guy or the top girl in charge of you, go ahead and rate their skill set, rate them on all these factors, their emotional intelligence, like the huddle thing, rate them on their technical skills for the task. So I'll make it even cleaner in hospitals. If you're like at Columbia Presby or you're at like one of these major academic centers, the chairman of gastroenterology, the chairman of the children's hospital, right? In my world, they would interview the doctors that report to them. And they found a fascinating thing. 95% of them, the top, were not ranked as the best doctor in their specialty, meaning only 5% of the top doctors were deemed the best at that field technically or academically by their peers. But they ranked in the top 5% consistently in the emotional intelligence category. Now, in the skill, not to get too in the weeds, in the skill category, none of them ranked below 50th percent, meaning nobody said the chairman of GI is in the bottom half skill-wise. Like, I wouldn't want him scoping my mom. No, none of them said that. They all said good to very good as a doctor, but exceptional in leadership traits. And the world is full of people who are in charge that are not the best they're not the best accountant, but they're the head accountant in the firm, or they're not the best lawyer. So what that tells you is exactly what you said. The ability to get the most out of others is probably the single most important feature once you get to CEO status. Now, again, this gets, and maybe you want to save this to later, this gets a little, now, if that's your best skill, you might not make a great founder, because the founder skills are, no, you need to know exactly what you're doing. And your EQ, frankly, matters less at that stage. What you need to do is be bold, be tenacious, and know what you're creating. That's the goal, right? Being able to turn my 7s into 9s on my team and my 6s into 8s is very important later. Right. And you know, that you're right. One thing you learn is, if you're going to found something and then run it and then grow it and then do this, you actually have to become a completely different
100%,
person along
100%.
the way.
And we never tell people that.
Yeah. So I mean, everything you're saying resonates very profoundly. So, you know, and you're right. And you or I might be lucky enough to have learned that on the journey. But you and I both know that journey is like, we could have fallen just as easily as we did.
100%.
Like, there's sharks and alligators. We come out talking the way we talk, but then you have kind of this like philanthropic, generous spirit where you look back and you're like, okay, all these people that are about to go, you know, walk this tightrope where there's a 1% chance, let me give them a thicker plank. There's no reason for them to guess and close their eyes and jump. Let me help them a little bit and tell them the blind spots.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that what we say all the time to entrepreneurs is, if you have passion and a good idea, you're good, right? So just go out into the wild, do this incredibly complicated thing. And the analogy that I use is a doctor. So if I said to you tomorrow, I'm going to go do heart surgery,
right?
You would say, did you go to medical school? Right. And I'd be like, nah, I'm just going to go and I'll fail fast. You know, things they say to founders. And we say that's fine for entrepreneurs. So the idea that we have to, you know, put our hand on the stove or kill the patient to get better at this incredibly complicated thing, frankly, is a disservice to the way we've done it in the US. We said, in the US, small business is everything. All the job growth comes from small business. It's about personal fulfillment. And as long as you have passion and grit, you're good. And it was an incredible disservice to people because of all the things that you're saying. This incredibly complicated thing, not just the business, but all the personal stuff you're doing and the evolution and the money and the family that goes all into that. Not to mention the sacrifice that everybody has to go through. We're like, nah, just go fail fast and figure out and do all this stuff lousy. And over the course of your life, hopefully one of those alligators doesn't eat you. It's ridiculous. And so, especially in healthcare, right? And industries like that are incredibly complicated.
So you started this first company where it was the first company to bring real incentives for people being responsible for their healthcare outcomes. That, by the way, should be its own. I didn't know that when I brought. So that should be its own conversation later. Like, you should have a separate conversation about that, because that's fat. And on that, you're exactly right. The impetus is, when I was in corporate, every open enrollment period, we would like deploy and be like, okay, new app, it's going to count your steps. And like, you know, if there's mental health on demand, nobody would show up to the seminars, let alone, you know, and nobody, when the end of the year, when we look at these things, right, some guy pitched us on this, like, we'd be like, dude, nobody's engaging in the app whatsoever. Well, it's your job to tell them. I'm like, no, I thought that's your job. I thought you have a product that's going to engage them in health or whatever. And you're right. And you brought incentives in, which is awesome. Right. And so I want to maybe we'll have a separate conversation about that. But one thing I want to really spend some time on is due to your personal journey. And then please, you got to share the story that led to not only the name, but the concept.
Yeah.
I love that story about the 10 pregnant women and blah,
Yeah.
blah. It's funny. And that's another thing I've learned, besides personal insight is people talk about inspiration, like how you have to be inspired. And one thing I've learned as I've gotten older, it's not, you or me are not unique in our ability to be inspired. We're unique in our ability to listen because there's inspiration everywhere.
Yeah.
And many times I'll be in a conversation and I'll hear something and I'm like, wait, stop.
Mhm.
There's something there. And everybody else is on their phone in the elevator ignoring it.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I don't have a unique ability to be inspired, but being an active listener,
Mhm.
being hyper acute to your surroundings, there's gold everywhere.
But I think it's the ability to pick that up and run it through you may be too young for this, but the old magic 8-ball, we used to shake up the magic 8-ball and it would tell you what to do.
Yeah. No, I remember that.
Right?
Yeah. It's like a fortune cookie in
To
an
take
8-ball.
it and hear it
Yeah.
and digest it and kind of run it through the blender and something comes out, goes, oh man, that's a thing. Like it's like the famous story they said, what do you think that when Henry Ford, was rolling out cars, if you asked people what they needed, they would say faster horses.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, it's the ability to be active listening. And some people have the skill to run it through the instant blender and go, I may not want to do it, but there's a thing there.
Yeah.
Something, and I can do something.
Yeah. Like an internal translating processor.
Yeah.
Right. But we should talk about that too.
Yeah.
But so then your journey, you built this company, you sold it, you were very successful. So you climbed the top of the mountain as a lawyer, you climbed the top of the mountain as an entrepreneur, and then give us the origin story for how you developed the company you're doing now, Lonely Entrepreneur.
Well, I think one thing that's worth noting along the way is that, I make it sound like everybody adopted incentives. I mean, they didn't. In fact, healthcare said, we're never going to do this.
Right.
We're never going to pay people to be healthy. So we had to fight the fight for years against, to your point, the institution. Eventually we got it, venture backed, and then grew a lot from nothing really to 800 employees in 2007, got offered a ridiculous amount of money in 2007, said, no way, we're growing. And a year later in 2008, almost got destroyed overnight. All the clients that we had sold our platform to were the biggest companies in America. So we went from rejecting a ridiculous amount of money. I can't even actually say the amount of money that was offered. And a year later, it was worth nothing. So 08 to 011 was wild.
Wow.
I mean, we had venture/private equity at that point. My family had money in business. So those couple of years are almost a blur. And then fortunately, through an incredible amount of hard work and really breaking a lot of rules. I mean, we told our team, listen, and the complications of healthcare, right? We told our team, don't break any laws, don't kill anybody. But other than that, make it up.
Right.
Because you're facing this tsunami and we're like sitting on the beach reading the paper.
Yeah.
Even though an 800 person company seemed like a lot, it's tiny.
Yeah.
And so we were fortunate over the course of, kind of that time to battle and scrap and claw. I used to say that I got kicked between the legs like 20 times a day, just stop noticing.
Yeah.
And then fortunately on the other end of the healthcare, on the financial crisis, everybody was interested in healthcare because it was so big. And then we got approached by some investment bankers and got bought. So it's always a sexier story to say, yeah, we built it.
Yeah, of course.
Built an industry and did it. But it really was, I mean, we'd run from being SaaS, highly profitable, growing like crazy, hockey stick, to literally a day later, almost out of business.
Yeah.
Because all our clients were the biggest companies in America that got hammered.
And
So
yet,
that whole journey was a wild journey. I felt very fortunate to come out the other end.
That's great.
Yeah.
It must have taken a lot of grit, perseverance. That you probably had some good people with you too.
And some bourbon along the way too.
Yeah, that always helps.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So then you get out of there live.
Yep.
And then tell us how you started this company. That's so interesting.
So as you can imagine, after that journey, it's just deep breath, right? I'm in New York. It's as we call it, build it, save it, sell it. Incredibly rewarding experience to come out the other end after all that. It would have been rewarding even if 2008 happened because we basically created an industry.
Yeah.
And so I was just relaxing in New York, wasn't thinking about anything. Like you said, I'm not a serial entrepreneur. To me, it's all about like the idea.
Yeah.
And I was literally just helping friends who were starting businesses or growing businesses, having coffee. And one of them said to me, being an entrepreneur is really lonely.
Yeah.
And it kind of hit me, but not really.
Yeah.
And then like 2 weeks later, I was walking down the street in Union Square with a buddy of mine and we were just BSing. And I said, lonely entrepreneur. And he said, what did you say? And I said, lonely entrepreneur. He goes, oh my God, that's brilliant. What is that? That says it all. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's a phrase. He goes, seriously? He goes, come here. And I didn't know where he's going. He walks across the street and goes into a Starbucks, packed Starbucks in Union Square. And he stops. He goes, watch this. And he screams at the top of his lungs, who here is a lonely entrepreneur? And literally, it seemed like everybody put their hand up. And it really struck me at that point. And I didn't really connect that back to my previous company. I was just a guy walking down the street.
Right.
What really struck me at that point was that, oh, there's a much bigger problem than rewarding people for being healthy, which we thought was important. There's all of these people in a talented place like New York with passion and grit and great ideas. And most of them, everybody here in a Starbucks, it's not turning into success.
Right.
And you're like, wow, if you could fix that problem,
Yeah.
that would be worth doing. And you're like, well, okay, that sounds good, but how do you do it?
Yeah.
And we had this great name, but I started to look around at the ecosystem, for lack of a better word, of how entrepreneurs get started or grow or learn. And if you prop them in New York or Boston or Nashville or Chicago and said, go, it's basically like throwing them out into the wild and saying, go figure this out on your own. And I was never a pure technology guy. I was a SaaS technology guy. I was like, why isn't there a platform?
Right.
Like, why isn't there just one place you can go? And what was really exciting to me about that is with a platform, you could help everybody.
Yeah.
You could help, the mom that bakes cookies and the college kid
Scalable,
and the kid that, the person that comes out of the military, and the ability to put that platform, we call it the learning community, with learning and coaching all in one place. And that's what the lonely entrepreneurs become. And so you feel like you can take people kind of from wherever they are and not say, go perform heart surgery and hope you don't kill anybody. Okay, now let's figure out and say, okay, I don't know the difference between a founder and CEO, or I don't know how to start a company.
Right.
And now you have all these kind of tools and assistants at your disposal in one place to try to help them. So that's what lonely entrepreneurs become.
So I want to go deep on that. But before I get deep, let's just like level set for people, because this is a very unique thing. Like, again, you said you had the vision to create an industry incentivizing healthcare habits. I think you're creating an industry now. Like, entrepreneurship is something that has been around. The concept of it, I think it's as nebulous as any concept.
Yeah.
But the notion of programmatizing or systemizing the journey, or what it means, or furthermore, how to be successful as an entrepreneur, is something I've never heard of.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe not definitionally, but connotatively, entrepreneur, when you hear that word, it means chaos. There's
right.
no
the opposite of structure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's being an entrepreneur. You just think like this. It's not. There's nothing predictable or programmatic about it. And in fact, we know there's a few elements that I would even say are critical that are not replicable, that are not dogmatic. And I think that's true. But I agree with you in that there's a lot of people I know that are smarter than me, that had a better idea, but maybe they didn't get to where they need to because they lacked systemization. Like, one thing I didn't tell you, me and my brother are partners. We're more your traditional entrepreneurs. Like, we have an idea and we just go, and we're like, okay, just jump, go. Like, my wife, who's an attorney, who's an extremely, like Mo could tell you, like a rational linear thinker, like all the shit that all the crap, like
back office,
HR, you want me to like leave a dinner, start talking about HR, revenue cycle, or like all these, like, to me. Now, we both know those things are critical. And I here in my defense, I recognize their importance. But the gift I have is I have someone who like excels at that. And so that's the difference, right? That's or that can be the difference.
Yep, sure.
And you don't even know what you don't know as an entrepreneur. Like, you have a great idea, you start doing something, and all of a sudden the city hall says, well, you're violation of ABC. Right. You're under before you start.
We always say that when you walk into a car dealership, you may not know what car you want to buy, but the car has an engine and 4 tires and a steering wheel. And most entrepreneurs don't know what the car needs.
And so you guys now
just kind of go.
that's what you've done, is you have a playbook, right? And then an ongoing learning. So to level set before we go a little deeper, it's tools. It's not, can you say, okay, I'm listening to this and I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm contemplating taking an entrepreneurial journey.
Yep.
What is it that your company offers?
So when we took a look at this and said, what does an entrepreneur need? Right. And we said it was we call it knowledge, tools, and support. So the first thing is there's all kinds of information you need. Whether you're starting a company, you have to figure out how to do it with a family member, finance, sales, marketing, you name what it is. So the first thing was knowledge. So that is now today 2,500 learning modules on everything you can possibly imagine. Sales, marketing. So you go in there, they're there at your disposal. They're kind of a page to 2 pages of text along with a video. So it says, okay, should I form an LLC or a C Corp, and just oodles and oodles those. And wherever you are in your journey, you can kind of access those on demand. It's kind of all organized for you, as opposed to today, which is talk to people with the same last name, Google things, right? So that's one thing. Tools are some of those unsexy things, but what you need. I need marketing templates and sample legal agreements and how to pick an accounting package. But again, I got to go search for them. It's all over the place. So that's there. And then the third part is the on-demand help. Because even if you organize everything, if you leave people to their own devices, it's hard because they don't know what they don't know. So we said, how do you provide on-demand help whenever they need it? So that's unlimited group coaching. So there's group coaching sessions going on online on virtually every topic you can imagine. They can sign up for an unlimited number of those.
That's awesome.
And then a place to get your questions answered real time. So this was modeled at the old Facebook group. You know, a mom goes into a Facebook group and says, who has the best dry cleaner?
Yeah.
And another mom answers.
Yeah.
We're like, why couldn't we do that for entrepreneurship? So the community is basically, they go in there, ask whatever questions they want. We have people on our team that all they do all day long is sit in the platform. So the whole idea is that I get information organized for me. I can tap into coaching. I can get my questions answered, whatever I want, kind of all in one box. And then they're all part of a big community of now over 130,000 entrepreneurs that interact with each other and connect with each other. But so I don't think, first of all, to your point, rewarding people for being healthy should have been done long before we came along. The one-stop shop for entrepreneurs, shame on the SBA or whoever it is, should have been done long before we came along.
Right.
But the whole idea is there one place that I can go?
Right.
We're not splitting the atom. It's just the model of putting knowledge next to tools, next to support when I need it, that we think is the recipe for success.
That's incredible. That's awesome. And like I said, you know, I'm sitting here. I don't know if you know, you did it again. Like, this is its own industry. Like if I ask you who's the lonely entrepreneur's competition, there is none. Like, that doesn't exist. There's no other, you know, and, you know, I'm in a similar boat to you that, you know, like, there isn't a day that Mo and I are not like in between meetings, like somebody who has like a startup in health tech, like comes by that used to work for me at whatever, or used to whatever, that comes by and they're like, hey, I'm doing this, or we're doing that. And like, every day there's those conversations. And, you know, I answer them because we have some personal connection, or it's like a personal connection's nephew or whatever. And we're like, okay, you know, here's where we, you know, whatever. But it's shocking. That's the only thing an entrepreneur can do is go to their, you know, uncle's friend who did it before.
Shocking. People, it's just shocking that in this country we said, and 98% of the businesses have under 10 employees in the country, right?
Yeah.
And we just said, go figure it out on your own. And we never thought about it systemically. I mean, back in the day when 1 of 1,000 people became an entrepreneur, or whatever the number is, you walked in your local bank branch and your banker helped you, or you walked into like a small business development center, or you walked into your chamber of commerce. Once entrepreneurship became a little bit more prevalent, the whole system was not set up to serve it. And what ended up happening is people started doing, oh, you can sign up for a course to how to do Facebook ads and sign, you know, go over here to get this legal agreement. And so what ends up happening is you get all this stuff and you also don't know who to trust.
Correct.
Right. So you go to some marketing firm and they say, this is how to do it, or some law firm that says, then you got to spend 15 grand on a trademark you're never going to enforce. And we just said, well, just this very simple proposition. Why isn't there a one-stop shop?
Exactly.
Like, why isn't there one place to go?
Exactly.
And so in a lot of ways, we think the most important skill that an entrepreneur has, and you've kind of said it twice, is that about our 2 businesses rather, is finding a playground where nobody else is playing. Like, it's not just you do something better. It's nobody's rewarding people for being healthy. There were plenty of reward programs, right, at the time. And the same thing with entrepreneurship. There's plenty of entrepreneur stuff. There's no lack of it. But is there a one-stop shop? And we say to everybody, we're all only entrepreneurs. Because it's really hard. Even if you're brilliant, if you talk to people that come from Fortune 500 companies that leave a division, run $1 billion division, and go try to start their own thing, they will sit in the corner and suck their thumb.
Yeah.
They would be like, I had no idea how hard this was. And I think we just did a disservice. So for us, the ability to put all that in one place to something you can trust. We're not a lawyer trying to sell you something. We're not a marketing firm trying to sell you something. We're just trying to help you on your journey.
Right.
Wherever you are. You actually see how people get, incrementally better at it every day.
That's incredible, man. That's a cool. And Mo, you're going to put a lot of the information and the links and stuff. And Diana, you're going to put that.
I think
on there, obviously.
we need to have his book in our office too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll get you guys one.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I want to now just like slice a little bit deeper. So, a lot of the stuff that you think is important, the tools, the knowledge, the community, comes from your personal journey, right? What consciously or subconsciously, the stuff that you think is needed. I want to talk a little bit about. I don't want to minimize or be reductive, but I do want to hit on some key points at least. Can you talk a little bit, and you could straddle it, Michael, like you could make it say, Z, that's something we do have in our offerings, or talk about your personal journey, or both. Can you talk about, like, you now touch over 100,000 entrepreneurs, right? What are the most common, the gal or the guy that's listening to this, they're 31 years old. He's a cop. He's like, hey, law enforcement's so broken, I have an idea. Or it's a teacher, education's so broken, there's a better way to do it, whatever. What are the common mistakes, the most common mistakes, or myths? Like what should be step 1, 2, and 3? If I want to take, besides, let's say, looking at a repository like yours that has all this information there.
I would say they, like my analogy of the car, they don't know what the foundations of a business are, right? When you and I got dressed today, we might not have known which shoes to put on. We knew we had to put on shoes.
Right.
So people go out there and like, I bake cookies,
right.
I'm a chef.
Right.
And they don't understand that they're about to go down the road with a car with 2 tires. Right. So they just don't know what those things are. They don't have to your point about your wife, what you like to do, you don't have to know them all or do them all. You just know that you need them.
Right.
Right. And that's the biggest thing they just don't know. And unfortunately, because we said, even if you don't have the right car, you have gas, which is passion, you can still drive.
Right.
They go. So instead of saying, how do I figure out what to do? So those things are pretty fundamental. So number one is, what is my goal? Right. So if you're creating one pizza stand, that's one plan. If you're creating Pizza Hut, it's a completely different plan.
Sure.
So people don't ever set a goal. They don't ever say, okay, so it's one of the wheels of the tire.
Right.
They never say, what am I trying to do? Right. If you want 200 patients in a concierge service, that's totally different from 2 million patients.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, once you have your goal, okay, what kind of financial plan do I have? Do I have any kind of financial plan about what I'm going to do to that goal? Because if you don't say, well, I bake cookies and I'm going to sell 10 cookies, you just say, I'm going to go.
Yeah.
You don't have a way to align anything to that. So you just go. You say, I'm going to go, instead of saying, I'm going to go from New York to California or New York to San Francisco, I'm going to go west.
Right.
So they don't have a goal. They don't have a financial plan. The third, and probably the most important, is, again, this whole idea of finding a playground, because it's such a cluttered world that you can have a goal and you can have a plan. If you don't have a way that you stand out and really find it where somebody goes, everybody else is selling apples and I'm selling oranges, not just mine's better than yours, because nobody pays attention to mine's better than yours. So I'll give you an example. There's a guy in Milwaukee who we've worked with, massage therapist, right? How many massage therapists in Milwaukee? Thousands.
Right.
He's struggling, right? So we're talking him through this stuff. Tell us a little bit about yourself, right? So he's like, yeah, I did a lot of jujitsu when I was a kid. And off the cuff, he says, yeah, and I actually weave a lot of jujitsu into my massage therapy. We're like, well, hold on a sec, what? So we're like, how many massage therapists again? 1,000 in Milwaukee. How many that integrate jujitsu? 1. Right? So if you don't do that third part, if you don't find that playground, you'll think your cookies are wonderful and you'll go bake your cookies. But when you get out into the world, even with a goal, even with a plan, you'll realize, oh my God, everybody else has good cookies. So you got to have a goal. You got to have a financial plan. You got to get this go-to-market, finding a playground. And then what comes from that is, what are my priorities given that?
I love that.
Right?
So those are the three
and those priorities dictate, okay, if I know what I need a team.
Yeah.
I'm a chef. I don't know anything about running a restaurant.
Right.
I'm a doctor. Great example.
How do I keep the books?
I can keep people alive.
Yeah.
But man, do I suck at billing.
Yeah.
right? So what are my priorities?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And my priorities might be, I need to hire an operations person, right? Like I knew I don't think I articulated this, but when I started my healthcare business, I know anything about healthcare.
Right. Right.
So I'm like, I got to get a healthcare product person
Right.
to bring them in. So I think that without that structure, it's go west.
Right. Right.
Right. And when you go west, you get up in Texas or Montana.
Yeah, sure.
And there's a lot of stuff a lot of energy it takes to go along the way.
I love
so
that.
It's really the foundational parts of it.
I know we're being reductive. I know that by doing it, but you did a really great job of like making it as elegant and practical and useful as possible. So, you got to know what your goal is. And I mean, that's so important because people like you come out and you're exactly right. Like one pizza like place versus it's a completely different approach.
Completely different approach.
And then the financial planning, and then what's your niche? What's your POV? What's your differentiating value prop? I love that. That's great. That's something people can sink their teeth into. I want to ask you a question that's a ricochet off of that. It's a slightly different question. So if I'm thinking like, okay, you have this software product, I could go on, it can teach me a lot, it can inform me, it can be kind of a guiding light through this dark cave. I love it. Can you talk, this might be more on the personal side. A lot of the folks that want to do something different and want to leave that steady corporate, whatever, that it doesn't have to be corporate. It could be just the cop, the nurse, whatever, anything steady and more linear, that have a great idea and are passionate, or they think they're passionate about it, don't have the work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, somewhere along the line, work-life balance turned into an asset instead of a liability.
Mm-hmm.
Now, don't get me wrong. I believe in work-life balance. I think my definition is not the colloquial one. I think it's, but I mean, I think I spend a lot of time with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think I know how to have a good time. I spend every other second on
mm-hmm.
my work, and I think it's balanced. Just, I'm not on the beach 3 times a week. And so
mm-hmm.
now, and I think if that makes you as happy as this makes me, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But to say, I want to do what you're doing and I want to be on the beach 3 days a week and I want to do this, that, I don't know, do you have a module for that? Or can you talk a little bit? You do. Okay. The intangible aspects, like the mindset. So we've covered a lot of the technical know-how or unknown that you need to know. And that's critical, right?
Yep.
Those are table stakes, although nobody tells them that.
Yeah.
Can we just ricochet off of that? And can you talk a little bit about, because I'll tell you why, because I can't tell you how many, I'm sure you deal with this, how many people I have that come to me and they're like, hey, I have a great idea. I listen. I'm like, that is a good idea. Nobody's doing ABC. Okay, but are you gonna have an app? And then we go down the path that you offer, and then you try to like hodgepodge that together, and then you realize like the guy checks in with you 3 months later. You're like, how's it going? Because there was like a loose business plan and this and that and this and that. Like, well, it's not this, and then you look under the hood, and of course, the first 100 clients that you need to beg, plead, kiss their ass, treat them better than family. Yep. Well, they wanted to come in on Thursdays, and Thursdays don't work for me because of whatever. And I'm like, dude, sorry, I didn't know I had to tell you that part. Yep. That the most fundamental element of this is it's a 24/7 thing for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
So to me, the learning is just as much all of those skills as it is the technical skills of business. And we call it managing yourself. There's so many things. I don't think, I've never been a mom, but maybe other than that, there's very few things that implicate your personal life, your emotional life, your financial life, your friendship, your like all that gets thrown into the entrepreneurial soup across all of that, right? Think about the advice that people give. Frankly, one of the problems is everybody gives entrepreneurial advice. You go down the store to the pizza guy and they'll be like,
how many times do I say the problem with advice is everybody gives it?
Yeah, 100%.
I've never had an uncle who has screwed everything up. And then when I'm like, hey, what do you think? He says, Z, I'm not the right person to give you advice. I've never heard that. Yeah. He's like, sit down. It's going to take a while.
Yeah, 100%. You're like, why did I had an uncle, I had a different business all the time. We're like, that's so cool. Well, they all went bankrupt. The same uncle, They all went bankrupt, right? That's why. But I think that all of that, those softer skills and how you relate, we've both dealt with family. That's a whole thing. What happens when you take friends and family money? Our whole thing was, it's not just business. So the first part is what's in the platform. It's all of it. And we're getting people ask questions on it. But I think to your point about work-life balance, I think it's off. I went to a panel one time. I'm sitting in the audience and it's called How Not to Burn Out as a Tech Founder. I was like, all right, that's kind of my jam. I'll show up to that. And they had 2 people who were wellness people on the stage, and they said, they're talking about, you have to really, you can't be obsessed. And I raised my hand. I was like, that is the biggest load of horseshit I've ever heard. Obsession is what is the glue of all of it. Because when you don't have a formed mechanism, it's this, and people and process and structure, the things you get when you get more mature, it's obsession that makes that work. And if you don't have that, you're not going to make it, especially if you do something a little bit to it. Now, the balance is, and the way we talk about balance is a couple of things. One, you have to have a release every day, whatever that release is. Sweating, playing with your kids, listening to music, doing yoga, whatever it is and when you do go into those releases, you have to really be there. Right. Like, don't go to the dinner party or go to the movies and be thinking about work. Right. You have to have it every day, because this obsession is the gas that makes it work and go along. Yeah. But I think that the people that find, like, people used to be like, oh my God, you run your own business, you get to write off the expenses. And you're like, where do you think the money comes from? Right? And you just realize that that the idea and the passion for the idea is foundational, but it's only a starting point. Right. And I say all the time, people talk about the role of passion. I was like, does anybody get up at a pitch competition and say they're not passionate? That might be better. Right. It might be better to get up there and say, I'm not really passionate about this. You'd get people's attention. Yeah, right. Right. But the point is that
oranges to apples.
Exactly. Yeah. Oranges to apples. So I think that sometimes we have said to people, as long as you have passion, grit, and a good idea, you're fine. Yeah. And that's not right. You have to learn all these skills. And part of those skills are definitely personal skills. How do you go into a meeting? The customer says, do you have X? And inevitably, in the beginning, you never have X.
Correct.
So are you a liar?
Correct. You bet. We'll have. I'm telling them I have X because I'm going to have it by tomorrow.
So we were doing a reward program. We were about to win a big program for Deloitte.
Yeah.
And Deloitte says, we're talking about this, and my head of operations there, right? And Deloitte says, we want to talk about Africa. We have 4 employees in Africa, whatever it is, right? Some tiny number of employees. And my head of operations, who's a nut, he goes, we have to tell them that we have no way to do that. I go, and we were in a room where they had the old leather openers. Remember that? I go, if you try to say that, I will stab you with the lever opener. So you go through all of these things in the entrepreneurial journey that are not linear. Yeah. It's like when you go to raise money, it's who has a problem raising money when you already have customers and already have the team? Like, that's not the rub.
Right.
The rub is how do you craft a narrative? Like, I know when we got our first money, we were like, we might be wrong, but we think that incentives is going to be the most important thing in healthcare. Yeah. That if we need the needle 5%, it has this amount of savings. So you don't want to invest in this. Don't you either believe that or don't. Like, it's the ability to do all those things when you don't have all the rest. So what goes with those is all the personal struggle like that. Am I supposed to be an egomaniac and tell? I said to health plans in moments of frustration, all due respect, you guys have effed up 1 out of every $6 in America for the last 100 years. Why would you keep doing the same thing? Yeah. Now that doesn't go over so well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But to your point, all of the visceral, emotional, personal, ego growth things that you have to go with are just as much a part of the journey as it is as the technical stuff.
So now we talked about, okay, I have an idea, I'm an entrepreneur. Where do I start? Okay, what's your goal? So you have the idea. What's the goal of the idea? What's your financial planning? Because that's the oxygen to the business, and you better have a clear, at least something resembling clear vision. And then what's your niche in that market? If you're going to be the 1,856,000 bagel shop,
right?
Cool, good luck. But is it bagels and ice cream? Like, what's your thing? Okay, we got that. And then we said, okay, outside of that, let's call those the hard skills. The soft skills is anything but soft. They're just as important, which is tenacity and like just obsession. That's that's better than that's the best word. That's what it is obsession, because like Mo or Sarah or a lot of the team members that we have, it's so funny. Like, people will come, they'll meet the team. It's this, I'm sure you can relate to this. They'll come meet my team, and you look at people's faces, and everybody, especially if they're finance guys or they're like corporate guys, they're always surprised. They're like, it's too young, or like, what's this, or what's the pedigree, or they're oh, look at how you guys dress, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then once they kind of engage in any way, like, we have a lot of members that
Mhm.
we take
Yep.
care of who are like really accomplished people just by virtue, we're on the Upper West Side, we're in Bergen County, we have a
Yeah.
lot of these guys.
Yeah.
They come in and we're playing hip hop in the office, and we have like a
Yep.
Miami scent and a vibe, and they heard about us. That's why they're there. They heard good things. And then they come in and you could just be like, they're like, and they expected the doctor being a bow tie, whatever
Yeah.
they expected. Leave. And all we ever get like a month later, 2 months later is like an email like, hey, Dr. Baker, sometimes like we haven't met. I just want you to know, like, it was 3 a.m. I was in Bangkok on a business trip. I messaged the app. I really thought nobody would answer. Someone answered, blah, blah, blah. And then 6 hours later, like Mo made sure that at the Mandarin Oriental in Bangkok, that the Zithromax was waiting there for me. Like that. And, once they kind of realize, okay, this is real, and they see what's being delivered in the product,
Yep.
they kind of understand. But one thing I think folks don't on the entrepreneurial journey don't understand that often is the importance, and we were just talking about this, the importance of the people that you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And I think that's just everything. I think your team is everything. I think you better have a great idea. I think everything we set up till now is really important. I don't think anything's more important, because even if you're obsessed as a founder, even if you're going to slip up.
Yeah. You're
going to slip up and you get shit wrong. The question is, do you have a team, which again, people like, you can't call it, like, I think of them as my family.
Mhm.
I'll tell you what, we spend more time together than I do with 90% of my family.
Mhm.
Like, other than my wife and kids and my brother,
Yep.
I have cousins that live down the street. I don't see as much as my core team.
Right.
And I know they don't see their people as much as me.
Yep.
Now we get together and we also have fun together.
Mhm.
And we enjoy it and we celebrate wins and stuff. But this family, and you would do anything for each other, actually. And you do anything for each other. You give up your weekends, you sacrifice all the time. We sneak in, watch when we watch the Steph Curry game together, the Olympic team, and we enjoy that together. But even, 24/7, that obsession, one person can only take it so far. And having the team, can you talk a little bit about, and maybe the Lonely Entrepreneur and the platform does talk to this. Sounds like it covers a lot. The importance as an entrepreneur on how early on you better recognize that you better build a really good team, and how much that informs your success.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you first start, you don't really understand that, right? It's just almost your own force of will, and your org chart, if you will, looks like a solar system with your head in the middle, and you're the sun, right? And everything revolves around you, and you get the other planets warm, but you're doing it by hook or by crook and everything along. And I don't think people, again, to the point of foundation, say, if you're going to get to the next step, you have to have a team, but not just a team that moves stuff around, but a team that actually can own something. And I think one of the real differences is kind of doers versus owners.
Right.
And when you're doing a lot yourself as the leader, and even if you have a couple of people around you, when you bring in, team members, and you bring in somebody that is a good doer, it still requires you to be all over it.
Correct.
Right? Versus a real owner.
Yeah.
Owner meaning, I got to sell 10 bananas, go.
Yeah.
And they will do whatever needs to be
you don't
done.
have to double check every hour.
And they will move mountains. They will say to you, I need a half hour of your time every week. They will do an Indian rain dance. They will actually own. And I think the mistakes we make as entrepreneurs is because we're so busy in the beginning, we'll take anybody.
Yeah.
Right? And if they're good doers, well, that's great, but they're still not owning. Right? So hey, I'm supposed to sell 10 bananas. What do you think I should have done? How did I do this? You never told me to do that. Right? All that stuff. So I think it is number one, the importance that you have to move from the solar system to a real org chart. Right. And when you think of those boxes, I mean, you talk about it, and your wife about all the back office stuff. Yeah. I would imagine she really owns it.
She owns it.
And if she didn't own it, you'd be dipping your toes into all these things. Yeah. And what that does is that makes you a bad CEO.
Yeah.
Right? You're not enabling the organization with the right level of team. Right. And we've all underhired for that team.
Right.
We hire the whatever it is, the controller, and we say that's enough. Maybe it's salary level, but sometimes it's just the ownership perspective that comes with people really owning things. And so when you get better, and you screw this up, right? When you get better at owning things and interviewing for that, you're like, okay, I need team members that are going to be able to do it. Great. Okay, controller, here's our goal financially. What's your plan?
Right.
And you try to flush out in the interview process how much do they have that real ownership mentality?
Right.
Of here's what, it doesn't have to be right, but
Right.
here's all the things that I would do. And the way I think of it is if you were running a charity event for something you really cared about, right? Or I say to my CO all the time, my right hand, Victoria, if they took your daughter away, if you didn't hit the goal,
right?
Like what you actually would do?
Yeah.
And that's a little ridiculous and extreme, but the point is not just team members for team members, which we're inclined to do, but can I find, and it's hard to find, can I find real owners?
Yeah.
Right. And you overcome things like, well, we didn't tell them what to do. Well, if you have to tell them what to do, you've already lost.
Right.
Right. So I think that the concept of I might have to start here and be a solar system, but if I'm going to get to the next level, and a lot of, probably me too in the beginning, a lot of founders and leaders go, nah, but nobody can do it like me. My family owns real estate in New York. My brother runs that real estate and then runs a property management business. And he says all the time, yeah, I don't think anybody manages property like me. And I'm like, Dan, somebody runs IBM.
Right.
Right. So, nobody makes the pizza like me.
Yeah.
You have to accept that no one is going to naturally do it in a concierge practice as well as you have, because you know all the nuances.
Yeah.
But the skill is not saying that. The skill is, how do I put in place the people and the process and the structures to enable teaching, learning, accountability that brings your vision of how to make the slice of pizza.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
That's not just like we don't do our job if we say, you're hired, go.
Right.
Because we have stuff in our brain as the founders are like, this is the best way to do it.
Right.
You have to systematize and impart that.
Yeah.
And that's a whole series of skills along the way. So
and you guys have that. You have
I mean, we have
that down.
Yeah, we have everything. It's just the nuance of that. It's not just the ability to put aside really just our platform. Yeah. There's nuances to all of them. Think about all the things we're talking about. There's nuances to every single one of this. Is this a ridiculous idea?
Yeah.
No, like if you take Hamilton, right, the second largest grossing musical of all time. Think if I came to you and I said, I have an idea.
Right.
We're going to do a musical about a historical figure that nobody knows or cares about. Yeah. And he's comes from an era where it's all white guys, and we're going to do it with hip hop.
Right.
You'd be like, that is the stupidest effing idea that I've ever heard. So each of these things, whether it's finding your playground or the team, comes with nuances that over time you get experience with and judgment with. In the platform, we're trying to do all of this stuff between the knowledge and how we're guiding them along the way. Right. But I think one of the things that we do a disservice to entrepreneurs is we cliche it all the time.
Correct.
We say talent's everything. Yeah. Cool. Or fail fast, or like all these cliches where people take that, right? Hire slow, fire fast. You're like, okay. Like
exactly.
And people actually use that stuff.
Yeah.
Because they're devoid of
context,
real guidance in other ways to do it.
Nuance.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, I could have this conversation. I don't know that we've had a conversation where I could just like do this for the next week and just have this conversation.
Yeah, you've been through it, right? Multiple times. Yeah. I have too. And you just know what the nuances are.
Yeah. It's a funny thing though. Like as we're talking, I don't know if you feel this way, as we're talking, the reason I know I like doing what hasn't been done. I'm curious how you feel about this, is because when you're talking, like I'm getting flashbacks. If you're traumatized, you get flashbacks. Right. I'm getting flashbacks to like traumatic, like, oh my God, when that happened, like I thought the world was gonna collapse. And it doesn't it's almost enjoyable, like to go through that. Like you were an athlete, like you go back to like even your losses, when you're out of them and you look back, you could garner the benefits that they offered you. Right. And so it's fascinating when I'm having this talk to you, like you think about elements of the journey 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago that you haven't thought about in a while.
Yeah.
You don't think about them. And then you look back and you're able to look at them with some perspective. And so it's actually like just a wonderful journey to go on with somebody who's been there. The last topic I want to kind of cover with you, my last question is, it's called the lonely entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And I might be missing the mark on this, Michael, and you tell me if I am, but I think a lot of what we discussed tonight is lonely in terms of you don't have what you need to be a successful entrepreneur. You're on an island devoid of the practical, technical, and informational aspects that it actually takes, whether that's LLCing, S corping, whether that's, do I do Facebook or Instagram, all this stuff. But can you talk about the other potential definition of being a lonely entrepreneur, which is, okay, the shit hit the fan and I don't have anybody to turn to. I'm the one who told my wife I'm going to leave my job and that is going to pay the mortgage and stuff. And now things aren't working out and I'm lonely. And I'm talking about the psychosocial elements here and the mental health elements here and the isolationism that comes with it, right? Where you bet the farm, so to speak. And now maybe things are not going the way you thought they would, which that's the only guarantee in the journey, is that there's going to be surprises every day, all the time. That's all. Can you talk about what your platform offers and assistance in that regard and just your personal experience?
Yeah. So I think you defined it really well. It was never literally just that second part. It was all of it. Yeah. The reason why it's lonely is not because you're physically by yourself. In fact, there's a lot of times you could be like, I have all these employees I have to pay for, right? And that's lonely. So it was really meant to encompass all of that, the brand, and that's how we always felt about it. But there's no question that part of it is that it all falls on you. And I felt like, I don't want to say uniquely, but the experience I went through in 2008, while I would never equate it to the tragedy of COVID or not having a roof over your house, I mean, it was 10 years almost destroyed in 10 days. And so, I'm sitting there not by myself. I mean, I had 800 people at that point, but it definitely falls on you, and no different from, like somebody that quits the job and does X and Y and Z. First of all, it's for big boys and girls, right? This is not for the faint of heart. Now, if you're doing, I'm just going to bake cookies in the neighborhood, it's easier because you can shut down the cookie shop and no big deal. But if you have visions of bigger things where you're going to, like you said, risk your family and doing X and Y and Z, I think the important part is putting pen to paper and executing the plan. The more time you spend on the emotional energy, right, of the what if. So when I woke up on October 5th, 2008, right, it's like the quote, I forget the astronaut, he says, they say, hey, when you're in that rocket, are you nervous? And he goes, anybody who sits on top of 10,000 pounds of helium gas that they're about to light on fire that isn't nervous doesn't really understand the situation. Like, and if another astronaut analogy is, if you remember the right stuff, the Apollo 13,
of course,
movie, right? The spaceship's blown up, and Kevin Bacon character is freaking out, and he's like, the heat shield and the thing and the thing and the thing. And Tom Hanks' character says, we need 113 things to go well. We're on number 7, work the problem. Right. And so the skill you develop is, I can say what if, but how do I make sure I spend as much of my energy on the things that actually moves the ball forward? Because what gets there is the customer, the loan, the fundraise, and any minute you spend on things that are, leaning into, like if I looked at the math literally for 700 days in my company, there's no math that made sense.
Right.
Like all my 75 million in revenue was basically gone in a day. Yeah. Who's my next customer? Gone. Like if I did that every day, like you would just suck your thumb in the corner.
Yeah, you have to put one foot in front of the other.
So it really is like when people come with some kind of trauma, which happens like you said, all the time. We will like, tonight, drink, smoke, get drunk, eat Haagen-Dazs, bang your head against the wall, cry. But tomorrow, so we did all this right in the middle of COVID. Yeah, so when COVID happened, we created this thing called the Entrepreneur Survival Guide. We basically in a week built a guide and said, here's what we learned in 2008. We're going to give it away to free. I think we gave it away to 11,000 people. And we'd have these sessions every day for an hour that anybody in the country could just show up on a Zoom.
That's really cool.
And we talked about it. And we said to them, you get one night. You get one night to wallow. Right. Because the skill, again, another skill is, how do I put pen to paper? And at that time you had to cut costs, get rid of customer, blah, blah, blah. You had to do stuff that every single day, realign things. And what we said was, and this doesn't help at the time, you will develop skills you never thought you had because you're going to be pushed to edges. But if you spend time on, oh my God, this can happen, or I can't pay my mortgage, you learn the skill. And I learned it because I would have sat, just like falling asleep, you got to sleep. But if I really thought about it every night, like I would be like, this, and don't get me wrong, we were working 20 hours a day.
Right.
So the skill you develop is to go, okay, it's natural to have those feelings. I got to have a plan and execute it and put all my energy into that. And I got to have a release.
Right.
Whatever your release is every day, whether it's going to the gym or yoga or hanging out with your kids. One of the things that was the most amazing thing that happened to me, which is so the opposite of what I would have expected. My brother on a Saturday says to me, I need you to watch Raina and Brendan, my niece and my nephew, and the world's collapsing. My company's collapsing. I'm like, what the F is wrong with you? What would make you think that 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, I'm going to watch them? He's like, listen, I'm really in a bind. You got to do it, whatever. I went over there. It was the best thing I ever did, because the 5-year-old does not give a shit about your balance sheet. They're laughing, throwing up, whatever. And I was like, Dan, I want to do that every single weekend. Because in the chaos, while executing the plan, that was a release. That for an hour a day. So again, to your point before, these, again, you won't really call them soft skills. These skills are skills you develop, right? There's a famous Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Love that quote.
And I think what it is to say, okay, when that trauma happens, right? First of all, don't evaluate your life in the middle of the fight, right? Because, if you've ever seen somebody get interviewed at the end of a boxing match, who the winner, they'll say, hey, champ, congratulations. Are you going to retire? He's like, of course I'm going to retire. Just got hit in the face for 3 hours. And that's the guy that won. And a week later, he's like, I'm good. I got money in the belt and whatever. There's definitely a time where you have to evaluate whether this is the right path for you. It's not in the middle of the fight. But while you're in there, you have to have the discipline to say, okay, of course I'm human to feel this, but if I'm not spending every waking hour on cutting costs, driving revenue, changing the team, doing all the things that incrementally get there, then shame on me. And those are the things, it's like it's cliche, but nothing succeeds like success, right? You sitting around and having another drink, right? And wallowing in it. So, it's easier said than done because it still sits there. But when you start to get those wins, right? That's what ultimately gives you the fuel and the energy to go, okay, I think this is going to work.
That comes, I think like when I listen to those words, Michael, and I agree with them, it comes from like that term that I used to hear that I never understood, strength of your convictions. I never understood that term really. And then what happened was like early on, people like question you, and often people that are ahead of you, like in some capacity, right? Like a more accomplished physician, a more experienced entrepreneur, question you. And just by virtue of who they are, that's enough to shake you. Like if that guy questions me, then shit. Like, and then
it's like an investor says it's no good, and it's like calling your baby ugly.
Exactly.
Right. It's like,
and then all of a sudden, like some points that what they told you wouldn't work, you made work. And then they're like, holy shit, that's really cool that you did that. And then you're like, oh, my opinion matters. Like my perspective is credible. And then you start to have it. And then all of a sudden it shifts where you actually value your perspective.
And it's a really hard thing, right? Because Harry Potter and Hamilton were rejected more than anything.
Right.
And they're the two most successful.
And that goes back to where the conversation started about humility and ego, because somebody could hear this conversation and be like, I got it. So like, if I have a vision, no matter what anybody says to me, I should stick to it. No, you need to actually prove, in a way, you need to prove to yourself that you deserve to just push through. And that comes from getting wins, and getting wins comes from like you worked the hardest, you believed the most, and you bled for it. Like you took, like, I like what you said about rain dance. Like you made what couldn't happen a few times.
Yep.
And that's when you can pull people in and say, no, this bet is worth it. And I think what you're doing with The Lonely Entrepreneur, it covers the gamut of all the questions that entrepreneurs sometimes don't know they have to ask.
Yeah. And
that's
I think
the scary part.
And I think 100% that is the scariest part. They just don't know what to look for. But I think to your point, along that way of, we can all listen to a cliche or a podcast that encourages us to do something completely different. And that could justify a lot of stuff. But I think there's nuance to that. There's feedback you get that really should be incorporated in. There's feedback you should get that you should completely ignore. You could go in the same building to raise money, and on floor number 2, the investor could say, that's not different enough. And floor number 3, they would say it's too different.
Yeah.
So the problem is you get all this feedback, right?
Yeah, the filter.
And you don't know what to do with it.
Right.
Some of it is like, if you say, I'm going to go sell a toothbrush, everybody knows what a toothbrush
Right.
is. So if I told you this, I said, listen, I'm going to create a service where you're going to get in a stranger's car
Right.
and you're going to pay them to take you somewhere.
Yeah.
You'd be like, that's a crime spree.
Or go a step further. You're gonna sleep on a stranger's
Stay in
couch.
someone's home,
Yeah.
right? Like, so the point is that there isn't the reason why we created the model Lonely Entrepreneur is you need somebody with you along the way. So you can say, listen, somebody told me this,
Yeah.
or I got this feedback from a customer. What do I actually do with this? And hopefully people that have gone through experiences go from, when you're younger, you have information. When you a little further along, you have knowledge. And when you're a little further along, you get judgment.
Right.
And that judgment comes from, okay, I got a piece of feedback. Does that mean I should really listen to that?
Right.
Does that mean I'm on the right track?
Right.
What was the data for the market for Uber before Uber?
Right.
0.
Right.
So if you said, well, what's the market for this? If you went to some traditional investor, they would be like, there isn't any.
Yeah.
If you asked, let's talk about, name the companies, Kodak, Blockbuster, right?
Yeah.
So it's really, the reason why we created the platform the way we did is, yes, there's information on this and there's ways to help yourself, but there's things that come across in a very moving target that it's very hard when you're first starting out to try to understand, which should I take? What should I take? Right? How much of this is relevant and how much of this, take healthcare, is just thinking about the same way we've done it for 100 years. And do I take something from that, or do I do the opposite? That is a minute by minute evolution.
Sure.
And if there's somebody with you that's been there and can give you the judgment and says, okay, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Don't do it. We do it in the entrepreneur ecosystem.
Yeah.
We'll be like, we gave money to the Chamber of Commerce to help 10 entrepreneurs. You're like, why would you do it to help 10 entrepreneurs? Right. Like, why wouldn't you give a platform to give it to 1,000?
Right, exactly.
So I think that the you have to be around judgment, but it can't just be a mentor once a week.
Yeah.
And that's why we built the platform the way we did. Not because it's magic answers.
Yeah.
Because if we can have you listen to something and learn something and go on a coaching session with others and hear how others have gone through it, but then every once in a while just ask a question, say, hey, somebody told me that my cookies suck or that whatever.
Right.
You can hopefully say, okay, here's what I would take out of it. Here's what I would not take out. And I think the way I think of it now is that for every 10 businesses, there's very few blockbuster drugs that are left, right? For every 10 businesses, one is so good, the idea is so good, it'll always work.
Right.
Rare.
Right.
One is so bad, it will never work.
Right.
The other 8, it's all how you do it.
Yeah.
It's just all how you execute it. And so much of what we've been talking to goes into that 8 that you could easily have 9 out of 10 fail, and you could easily have 9 out of 10 succeed. But it's that ongoing day-to-day guidance along the way, right, to deal with both the functional issues and all of these emotional, visceral, humility and emotional intelligence issues that, you have to kind of hopefully wiggle people through to have a better chance of success.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, something like even people I went to school with in DC forgot about that I bring up to them. Like Amazon's like the biggest company in the world. And when I was in school in DC, there was a company and we actually used it, I don't know, for a year. It was like called Cosmo. And like you would grab your flip phone at that time or whatever, and you would say like, I want like a pack of cigarettes, or I want gum or whatever. And they would ship it in a few days to your apartment. Mm-hmm. That's what Amazon is.
Yeah.
Napster, Spotify, they're the competitor to Uber. So what you're talking about, where you say like, people are like, oh my God, that idea was brilliant. Actually, once in a blue moon, it's the idea. Mm-hmm. But the most successful organizations are actually less about the rarity of the idea and more about the excellence of execution. And that's where the partnering of what you guys offer comes in. This was like one of my favorite conversations, man. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm banking on us coordinating some follow-ups and going deep and whatever. And I I can't imagine somebody who's entertaining or engaging in an entrepreneurial journey not taking advantage of the offerings that you laid out. I'm actually curious to explore them myself. It was great to talk to you, man. You have a hell of a story, and I love your energy.
Well, listen, I really appreciate it because, we've all, as we like to say, it's not just a cliche, we're all lonely entrepreneurs. Like, we've all been through the journey. And I think for people that haven't sat where I've sat, where you've sat, it's really hard to understand. It's really hard to understand that complicated soup, especially when you've done it with family. Yeah. And we, because of the experience of lonely entrepreneur came very organically, and I didn't know it was coming. So to go through that whole thing in my healthcare business and to be there on October 15, 2008 and go through that and come out the other side, I had no idea what I was going to do next. And it was so organic, right? For somebody for me to see all those people in a Starbucks to say lonely entrepreneur, that for me, it's just so hard to watch. I mean, I'm sure you see it too, and we've all done it ourselves. It's so hard to watch people put their heart and soul into this stuff and just be going down a path of failure because whatever it is, the country or the government or whatever hasn't set them up to be successful. So this is fun. And I just always appreciate people that have kind of been in the chair as well. So I appreciate it.
Well, it comes across, man. Thank you again for your time.
You got
this
it, man.
Awesome, man.
Awesome.
Thanks.